Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I'm Dr. Ray Mitch, your host. I'm glad that you took some time out of your busy schedule to join us for this episode. I'm referring to it as a special edition because we're going to be talking about the silent retreat, which I am fresh off of. We just all headed back home after lunch today. And so we're all trying to get adjusted back into the pandemonium that is the reality we live in, the very noisy world that we live in. And I'm sure that many of the retreatants that were part of the retreat are certainly trying to get adjusted to it. There's a lot about a silent retreat that when you get so accustomed to the quiet that you go back into the normal life you came from, and you realize just how noisy it is. It can be pretty overstimulating in some respects. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Just to orient you, if you've never listened to me before, the Psych Monologues is a podcast that's looking at the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. And as I've said on previous podcasts, there's a lot of times that people usually don't get those things connected up. We talk about them in isolation from one another, but don't really talk about them in interaction with one another. And that's really what I want to try to do as a result of some of the conversations that go on here. So the Psych Monologues is actually an outgrowth of a larger organization that was born in June called Stained Glass International. I just call it SGI. And Stained Glass mission is to equip, encourage, and empower the next generation of Christians to live authentically in relationship to Jesus, others, and themselves. And one of the main outgrowths, besides the Psych Monologues, one of the main focal points of effort and emphasis is what I call creating outposts for the heart and communities for the soul. And that's some of what I think oftentimes when students and young people participate in a silent retreat, that's actually, I think, what they sense or feel or experience. So that's a part of it. One of the ministries of SGI is sponsoring and leading these silent retreats. And so this is the first one of the spring. And we started up last Thursday. But before I get into that, I feel like I've got to say a disclaimer. I don't know why I feel this way, but it occurred to me after having listened to a lot of podcasts and thinking about what it is I'm trying to accomplish in doing a podcast like this. And the disclaimer is this: if you're looking for specific information about whatever the topic is, not just mental health, but some of these other things that I like to talk about, then this podcast is probably not going to be for you, because my effort is not geared toward just providing information. It is providing information within a context that is part of what I am trying to do with the creation of this. And I've often said that the history of the Psych Monologues was really, out of need. And I had a group of students that were going through the pandemic, and they lost their graduation and they lost a lot of the goodbyes. And so I decided, well, this is one way to reach into where they are, and that's how it got started. It blossomed into a lot more things. So if you're looking for specific information, I'm probably not the place to find it. There will be plenty of specific information. It's just not, I'm not here to give you steps. I'm not here to give you a formula. I'm here to describe an experience and describe even a relationship that I think is so important in terms of when we're talking about spiritual formation. Psychology has a lot to offer us to understand how that works. And so the silent retreat is an opportunity for that. And so I want to take some time to reflect on this. I realized as I was getting ready to launch into this tonight that this is Silent Retreat 25 for me. I've been doing these for, personally, I've been doing these for 18 years. I've been doing it at CCU for 13 years. I've been there 15. And so, you figure out it was one a year for a while, and then we did two, and now we're up to three. And so there's a lot of history that I just realized that I've had as I look back over the pictures of the groups that were anywhere from 4 to 10, like today, the weekend, to more. And it really has been pretty remarkable to watch God move in people's lives. And the thing that is key is silence and solitude. And the thing that I think we have to keep in mind is when we're talking about a silent retreat, most of the time, because of everything else that goes on in our world, in the Christian world, particularly in the evangelical churches, is that everything is planned. Everything has a schedule. Everything has an agenda. And quite honestly, between you, me, and the hedge post fence, which that's all this is, right, is that sometimes we get so busy with our schedules that we squeeze God out of it. And the remarkable thing, and this is a theme that came up, and I'll expand it here in a minute. But if you're going into a silent retreat to expand your knowledge, this is not the place to do it. It is the place to find out how to be. As simple as that. And it's far from simple, because there's hardly any place in the world that we exist that we're not just have the freedom to be where we are and how we are and who we are and all of those things. We're so busy creating images of who we are that we never have the freedom just to be who we are. And quite honestly, I think when it comes right down to it, we don't trust anybody with the be of who we are, because we already have an opinion of it, and we just assume that everybody will have the same opinion. So one of the questions I often get is why? Why do a silent retreat? What is it all about? And why is silence so important? I had one author actually comment that the air that our soul breathes is needed and is provided by silence and solitude. Now, I think there's plenty to pay attention to there, because we see points in time in Jesus' time on earth when we say, well, okay, he's the model for us, right? And he spent specific times in silence and solitude. And if you ask, I think, any upstanding Christian today, Christ follower, whatever word you want to use, okay, how much time do you spend in silence? And I think you might be stunned, because they might have to think and think and think, and they might say, well, I was quiet on my drive in. But quiet and solitude and silence is very, very different. And so the thing that I always say is a silent retreat or a time of silence and solitude creates a space for us to make ourselves available to God. And that's the most jarring part of it, right? Because oftentimes, and I've heard people pray this, and I often will, depending on whether I have standing with them to say anything about it, but I have people often pray that God would show up. And I think we got it backwards, because really what it is God already shows up. We just have to make ourselves available to it. And that's really what a silent retreat does, is it creates this space to make ourselves available to God. And it's interesting from the stories that I heard this weekend, a lot of people making the comment that, suddenly they could hear the birds and suddenly they felt the wind, and suddenly it seemed like there was color to things that they hadn't noticed before, or even small details like what was on a doorknob, as funny as that sounds, but we don't pay any attention. We are so distracted and so overrun with sound that we've gotten numb to the world around us. And we often forget very easily that we live in a God-saturated world. He's here. And so one author that I often quote is that God is always home. I mean, a lot of times kids accept Jesus where? Into their hearts. And even as when I was younger, I remember my heart, God's home idea, right? So God's always home. It's we who take the walks. We're the ones that take the walks away from that. And then we come back and we rediscover it, or we rediscover God for that matter. And so I think the jarring thing about silence is that we don't bring anything to it. We look for agendas and plans and projects and how to measure what we're doing. And if we're open to it and dropping those, what we find is that God will meet us right where we are. Not where we're supposed to be. Excuse me. Not where we're supposed to be. He meets us right where we are. Now, sometimes we're in denial about where we are, and he still meets us there, and that gets a little uncomfortable. Because either I embrace the reality that I'm in, and that's where God's meeting me, or I say, no, that's not quite right, and I recreate another image of what things are. The incredible thing about it is that oftentimes in our first attempt to do this, we present the image that we've always presented to people around us to God. And God's saying, wait, that's not you. So let's drop that and let's just get down to you and me, and that's it. I mean, one author literally called it, we present our naked self to God. And silence has a way of stripping that away. And oftentimes that's exactly why people don't like it very much. I had a good friend of mine that went on one of these retreats, and he made mention of the fact that he always knew about silence and solitude, and he always knew that was a good thing to do and so forth. And he said, probably one of the most jarring things I found out while in my efforts to be silent was I found out that the silence was inhabited. Someone was waiting for me. There was some presence waiting to meet me as I am. And when we spend all of our lives presenting ourselves as we should be, it comes really hard to present ourselves as we are. And see, one of the things that I've noticed is that we've substituted busyness and productivity for spirituality because we believe we're contributing to the kingdom of God. And that's taking more responsibility than we have. The thing that I think of, even as I'm talking about this, is the Billy Graham crusades. And oftentimes the song that was played when people would file up to the stage to make a profession of faith was a song that Billy Graham always had himself, and he had a guy that sang the songs. And I forget his name, Barrows, I think was his last name. But the song that they always played, and is seared into my memory, is Just As I Am. And we live in a world is just as I present myself, not just as I am. I'm so far away from that presenting myself as I am is a steep order. It's a steep climb to make. So what has happened essentially, and this is what I found the longer I've done these retreats, and a lot of it with young people, partly because, quite honestly, I think they're more willing to explore this than the older generations. It's not that they're not, the older generations aren't, but they seem to be so immersed in the ways of doing their following Jesus that to consider doing it another way is very alarming because guess what? I don't know how to do it. But the funny thing about it is, if I'm just presenting myself as I am, is there even a way to do it wrong? And I don't think it is. I don't think there is. It's even a halting attempt to present myself as I am is better than presenting myself as I think I should be. And so that's what a silent retreat is. And one of the things I'll tell you first about the structure, because I think it's unique. It's fairly unique. I think in a lot of other faith traditions that have done retreat, that you walk into the very place that we do it, right? We do it at Sacred Heart Jesuit Retreat House in Sedalia, Colorado. And the prevailing method, if you will, is some measure of inspirational speaking or training, and then sending people off to consider what they have just gotten, and then meeting with a spiritual director for application of it. And all of this is one-on-one. And there's a place for that. There is very much of a place for that, and I'm not diminishing that at all. But what we do, because it is uniquely designed for the younger generation, is we actually do spiritual direction in a group. And they share with one another the stories of the day, the stories of presenting themselves to God, the stories of how God presented himself to them and what that actually looked like. So what I want to present here is some of the themes that came out of this weekend. And they're typical. They are very, very typical. But before I get into that, I want to make one last point, and that is, because we have equated busyness and productivity for spirituality, we have become so consumed with the external realities of our world that we begin ignoring the internal realities of our life. And when we do that, we get farther and farther away from caring for that. And so when somebody says, I just want to get to know you, tell me your story, we start telling stories of things long ago. We don't have any current stories because we're not living there. And so often, and I've seen this happen so many times, so often, how can I give somebody something of me, the internal realities of my life, if I don't spend any time looking at it? I oftentimes refer to this as kind of walking the landscape of your own heart. What does it look like? What does it look like? Is it a desert? Is it a lush garden? Is it got places of wildness to it? And are there places that we've cordoned off and said, no, these are not, I'm not talking about these. You can't look in here. And so it's important, I think, to explore and examine our own hearts. Not so much about how hard it is to present ourselves, but how committed we are to not being seen and known. And the crazy thing about it is we are so committed to that, almost reflexively committed to that we bemoan the fact that we feel alone and unknown, but we're doing everything in our power to make sure nobody knows us. Because oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, we believe that if you knew me the way I know me, you wouldn't like me either, really. And so those are some kind of beginning observations of this whole thing. We always start, and I'll give you a kind of a logistical structure first. We always start on a Thursday evening. And so we gather there in the evening after dinner. and we gather and sit and basically do kind of what's coming and what do we fear and that sort of thing. I have a very favorite question I ask, and I ask it in all my classes when I start, and I rarely get real profound answers. Now, it changes. How they answer that question changes by the time the weekend is over. But I always ask, what are your hopes? What are your fears? And what are you expecting to have happen? And a lot of times people will say, well, I don't know what to expect of this because I've never done one. And that's fair. It is fair. The odd thing about it is that we have expectations. We just don't identify what they are. And so when something happens, what do you hear somebody say? Well, I didn't expect that to happen. So we must have some expectations about it. There were plenty of fears about what God would do. and it's funny. This connects up with my previous podcast about our image of God says so much about us. And whatever we see God as, it gives away a lot about ourselves in terms of performance, in terms of anxiety, in terms of controlling the world around us, all of those things. And ironically, and I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, ironically, we're doing exactly what Blaise Pascal said we do, and that is God made man in his own image, and we return the favor. We make a God in our own image, thinking about us the way we do, and then when things fall apart, that God can't step up and do it because the dirty little secret is he's not God. The God that we've created isn't. So what do? We expect God to ambush us. We expect him to crush us, to ask us to do things that we don't want to do. And it betrays just how little we know of God's heart and our Abba's heart, our Father's heart for us. Because his heart isn't to force us to do something we don't want to do. He makes it possible for us to choose. But he's just like us. Maybe I should say better. We are just like him. Because I don't know about you, but if I'm going to be loved, I want to be loved because the person chose to love me, not because they have to. Obligation removes love. See, the thing I always say, and I'll say it here, is love flourishes in freedom. So God looked for a way. He didn't have to look very far, but he looked for a way to free us, which means that I can make the good choice of choosing a relationship with him, or I can choose not. And there are consequences on both of those sides, each of those decisions. And the funny thing about it is, like I was talking about in the ancient pandemic, is that we do that with each other. It's like we want to limit the options because we're afraid if somebody had freedom, they would walk away. So some themes that I heard over the weekend, and the thing that the role that I play along with Dr. Saxby is clarifying and listening to what direction the Spirit is moving people and making observations and providing some challenge about places to pay attention to. It always is helpful, right, to have a guide that says, look here or go in that direction. You might want to give that a shot. And that's kind of the role we play. Granted, we're both trained psychologists and counselors, but that's not really what we're about. We're not trying to be therapeutic for somebody. We're trying to sense what God's Spirit is doing in somebody and encouraging them and helping them and guiding them deeper into that. And sometimes it's just really very frightening, and I very much get that. I started there. My very first retreat, and I ended up, inflicting it on my students, that my very first retreat was 5 uninterrupted days of silence. And I got there. I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody warned me. It was an assignment I was given by my spiritual director. He said, if I'm going to be your spiritual director, I want you to do this. And so I go, and I have no idea what I'm heading into. I've never been to a retreat house or anything like this, but I knew it was going to be silence. But I thought, well, I'm kind of an introvert. I don't mind silence. And I got there, and I had no clue what I was doing. I finally figured out how to get to my room and get settled in. And my spiritual director came and knocked on the door and said, hey, when do you want to meet tomorrow? We set up a time. And just before he left, I stopped him, and I said, and they're really good, and not to be facetious, but a really good evangelical question. So what exactly do I do? And he said something that stuck with me that I pass on to people that come to our retreats, and that is, so what does your heart want to do? And I thought about it, and it was like, beats the heck out of me. I don't know. I don't listen to my heart. And what is my heart anyway? And why is it so important? And things like those kinds of questions. And he just smiled and said, let's talk and see. And so I pondered that question about what does my heart want to do? And it wasn't reading. I'm like a lot of our students. They bring 4 or 5 books and can choose from one of them as a backup plan because if it gets too boring or whatever. And there's some parts of it that we realize that our heart is just exhausted and tired and just needs rest. But somehow, because of our emphasis on being productive, taking a time of rest is wasting time. It's doing nothing, and that's against the rules, if you will. So we start there, and we start there with the what we often refer to it as a debrief. And we talk about it, and I set some expectations and set some, how this might work and what to look out for and some of the other things. And then we adjourn. People go up to their rooms and decide what to do with themselves. And a lot of times they just head straight to bed and sleep. And and there's a lot about a silent retreat that is jarring but comforting in a lot of ways. And so we do that. And then 23 hours later, is it 23? 22 hours later, we get together and we say, so what's God doing? What'd you see? What challenges have you faced? What wrestling matches have you been engaged in? What things encouraged your heart and was special to you? And the thing that's hard to do in a context like that of a group is that as each person tells their story, we get tempted into comparing our experience with their story. And it's way too easy to say, well, their story is so much more meaningful than mine. I don't have anything particularly profound that happened, so why talk about it? But see, the funny thing about it is you begin to understand, I think silence clarifies this for us, is that it's all part of the deal. It's all part of the deal. It is entirely a part of what this is really all about. Is the wrestling with silence is the journey. The being frustrated about how things are going is the journey. Talking to other people, because, we have traveling companions. That's kind of how I see the retreats, is that I've got a group of people that I'm walking with, and in my mind's eye, I think that must have been what a lot of the Jews had during Passover when they made the annual trek to Jerusalem. They walked in groups. And that same thing is what happens in a silent retreat. So 22 hours pass. We do another debrief. We ask what's going on, what kinds of things are happening, what is your observations. Sometimes people will talk, sometimes they won't. There's no expectation one way or the other. It's entirely up to them. But the more stories be told, the more courage is found, which is funny because guess what resides or what is part of our story? Our hearts. And so as we share our story, we share our hearts. And as we share our hearts, other hearts are encouraged, and some even find the courage to give it a voice. It's amazing. It is miraculous if you really get right down to it. And one retreat actually said that. It was like they were stunned. They were stunned that what the level of vulnerability was being displayed. It was not something that was seen normally, even though we long for it normally. And so one of the biggest themes, I think, that came up was the difficulty of being, which it's really hard grammatically to try to say this in some kind of coherent sort of way, but it's like the difficulty of just being. And like, what do I do to just be? Which is just an oxymoron. Because we have been so conditioned that the value of my being is determined by the things that I do. And in a lot of cases, being comfortable or resting is part of being, right? I mean, if you've ever held a baby in your arms, they don't squirm and worry about what you're thinking about them while they're taking a snooze in your arm. They're just being. And for us, as we get older, and all of these expectations and things are piled on, and internal demands and all of these other things are piled on top of us. And we're saying, okay, whatever you say, I'm going to do that. That's how I'm going to do it, etc. And we get so busy doing things that we forget about how just to be. And fundamentally, we end up rejecting the fact that we are a human being. We're not a human doing. And God is asking us and inviting us to bring our being to him. He's not interested in all the things that I put forth as this is me. My accomplishments, my knowledge, all of these things are part of that. And the hard part of being is it confronts us with the reality that we don't think our being is of value without doing something to prove that it is. When you really get down into it and you push real hard in on it, you begin to realize how much how much I reject the idea that I have inherent worth just as I am, just as the being that I am. I have to add something else to it. I have to create something for a trade of it, whatever it is. And so if I don't see myself as having value, and that's another point that we need to talk about, but if I don't see myself as having value, then I'm not going to invest in it. I'll invest in giving it away to everybody, but then there won't be anything left. And then I wonder why I'm so exhausted and I don't feel very close to God. Because I've exhausted all the resources. I have not cared for the being of who I am. And so when I'm asked and God says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, doing what? Doing things. And he says, I'll give you rest. For my burden is light. And it's like, no, I want a heavy burden. There's something just off about that. And that's that, again, it confronts how do we judge our worth? Now, that's another point that I want to get at, because I spent some time talking about this, is that we can talk about the image of God, okay? The Latin is imago Dei. And I can talk about that, and I have inherent worth as an image bearer of God. But how much of my life reflects that? Do I really believe that I have inherent worth? Or am I so busy proving that I have worth that I forget about the fact that I actually have worth because I exist? And I'm not sure that's compelling. We're always looking for something to prove ourselves when God is basically saying, I love you as you are, not as you should be, because you're never going to be what you should be. So let's get that off the table. But I love you as you are. And it's a call for us to do the same, to love ourselves as we are. Now, there is one key point that comes into everybody's mind when I say that. Well, that means I won't change at all. I don't have any reason to. And yeah, I'm sure there are probably people that see it that way. But if I accept myself as I am, the chances of me changing are far greater than if I spend all of my time rejecting myself as I am, right? We do that. That's regular course. And all we have to do is listen to the internal narrative when we don't perform according to whatever our rigid, demanding expectations are of our performance. Not our person, but of our performance. And so I can tell people that. And I can tell this younger generation that. And they'll nod their head politely. And there are one way to think about this. There are two different boxes in people. There's a knowledge box and there's a being box. And the knowledge box is where we curate and collect all the knowledge we need to do what? To talk to other people about my knowledge? But the thing to keep in mind is the being box. There is a firewall between knowledge and being. And when I teach students stuff, all sorts of stuff, guess where it goes? Into the knowledge box. It doesn't go into the being box. It doesn't expand their understanding of who they are as image bearers of God and free them to pursue that even more. No, they collect all of this knowledge in order to regurgitate it by the end of the semester and get the necessary grade, which is a doing thing, that gets translated into a being value. And so we look like we are accepting the things that we're told, but we put it in the knowledge box. It never informs our being box. And that's the very thing that undermines and is the voice of all the frustration I hear from people when they say, I can't connect my head with my heart. And that's, I can't connect the stuff I know to the way I am, my heart. And that's the key. And I know it. I know for me, because I've spent a lot of time talking to people over the years, I know what I'm looking for. And you know, the funny thing is when you point things out to somebody, you know what they say? I say it. I'm guilty as charged. But you know what they say? I know that. And sometimes I did this weekend. Sometimes I can get a little testy and say, no, you don't. If you really knew it, it would show up in how you be. See, that's the grammatical problem. But it would show up in how you behave, how you see yourself, how you interact with other people. But we know something. We always know something. We live in what? A information age. We know at our fingertips we can know something. But that changes nothing, and we get frustrated because we expect the knowledge to just seep into the being, and then magically we're going to be different. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And the interesting thing about it is that a silent retreat actually invites cracks in the firewall between being and knowing. It invites the cracks. And when that crack opens, a little bit like a window, there are other people there to meet us. And guess what happens? We learn to meet ourselves. I have another theme is silence from God. And I had one person talk about that, and it's like, he walked down the path complaining about God being silent, and the question has to be asked, who are you saying it to? Because in the moment I'm demanding God to talk, I'm too busy talking. And we hate silence. I think we hate silence in a lot of different ways. But one of the things we hate is silence from God. You know why? Because we have a demand of God that if I'm going to talk to you, then you pretty well should respond. And if you don't love me, you have abandoned me, and you don't care. So what do? We interpret the silence. That's what we do. We interpret it. And God doesn't even get a hearing. We're just saying, that's what you are because you're not answering me. And the interesting thing about that, what I have found, and certainly I've found it in my own journey, is that when God's not speaking, it might be that he has nothing to add, or it might be that it's about me grappling with me and he's getting out of the way. And I want somebody to fight. I don't know how to fight myself other than condemn myself, but that's not quite the same thing. So silence from God is another one. And there are lots of Psalms that say, where are you, God? There are a lot of Psalms. And so we're in good company when we feel that way. The other one that comes up is just, and I talked about it in a couple podcasts ago. I guess it's probably more than that, but it's the barrier to God. It's being angry with God and saying, if you're so great, if you're so wonderful, if you're so omnipotent, why all this crap is going on here? And humans hurt other humans and all of that. And if we carry it all the way out, really when it comes right down to it, then we don't want our free will. If that's the case. But let's be clear about who's responsible for what here, okay? You can be angry at God. That's fine. You can be as angry as you want to be. God's not going to shrink or step back or be intimidated or anything like that. You can be as angry as you want. But let's just be clear about who's perpetrating what here. Now, the interesting thing about that is we've got God in this nice little double bind. If he does nothing, he doesn't care. And if he does something, it's the wrong something. and we still stay justified in our anger. And more often than not, what I have seen is that anger has a core of hurt and confusion and doubt and just wanting to be saved, understandably, but wanting to be saved from what it is we're in. And understandable. I mean, the amazing thing about our God is we have a God that can look at the things we go through, which we're told in Hebrews. We can go look at the things we go through, and God can say, yeah, me too. In Jesus, I experienced that. And I did that intentionally so I could understand the difficulty of being human. Now, Jesus did it perfectly, but that doesn't remove the stresses and the pressures that are felt by us that he felt too. And so anger with God, silence from God. Another one was just the freedom we gain from telling our stories, which is a bigger theme that we talked about, and that is we disempower that which we name. And so I can't address an issue if I don't name it for what it is. In a lot of cases, we have a great deal of ambivalence about that, because if I name it, then I've, quote unquote, I've got to do something about it. And it's like, who told you have to do anything about it? Maybe what's more important is to talk to other people about it. See, we are living in our very comfortable prison cell, and we leave the door open so people can see us and we can interact with people, but we still are very comfortable in our nice, cozy little prison cell that is safe, it is secure, I can control it, it's predictable, and I don't have to come out. I can look vulnerable in there, but I don't have to come out and risk all the variables that strike me when I walk outside of that. And we live that way a lot. I point you back to my previous podcast when I was talking about the Matrix. The silent retreat is a point in time where people are most available to be saved and pulled out of the matrix of demands and expectations and performance and shame and everything else. There's opportunities galore in that. And so naming it, we think if I name it, it gives it more power. But what it actually does is it becomes clearer, and quite honestly, oftentimes it shrinks because I've named it for what it is. And I have a parable that I oftentimes give out called Kiss Your Monster on the Nose. You can look it up on the internet. You can find it very easily. And it tells a story of a little girl that kisses her monster on the nose. That obviously is the title. But in so doing, the monster said, because you have come to me, and it was her fear, because you've come to me, you've grown in wisdom, and you have conquered that fear, and now you're not held hostage by all the things that would lead you to destruction. It's an amazing little story. But we disempower what we name, what we say what it is. And we're so afraid of doing that with other people because we're afraid of the conclusions they will make, and we're sure that they're going to be the same conclusions we make. So naming it was a big theme this weekend. And naming it not only with people where there's risk, but naming it to God as well. Because it's not like I know what a lot of people are like, well, he already knows, why do I have to say it? Because the minute it comes out of our mouth into public, it runs out of our reach, and now we have to own it for what it is. And sometimes we find out it's not as big as it appears. And so naming it was another one. And then I already mentioned the knowledge box and the being box and all of that. And another big part of it was just trust and risk and control. Trust and risk always go together. They always do. You cannot have one without the other. We want trust, but no risk. And when we want trust, but no risk, we're looking for a world that doesn't exist. You and I risk things when we get out of bed. I think everybody knows that. We've had multiple stories of that. And climb into a 3,000-pound vehicle that hurtles at 60 miles an hour toward other vehicles. Risk? Yeah, but that's an acceptable risk, or that's one that I know. And okay, it's still risk. There's a lot of variables that we just don't know about. So the thing that I notice in being a part of these retreats is I see these themes begin to show up. Time and again, I've been honored to be a part of 25 of these things. And I've had, as I often have said to people, it's like I have the privilege of having a front row seat on watching God move, and people recognize that it's Him moving, and it's crazy cool. Not to sound overly kind of trite or common, but it really is quite an amazing thing. And that's a part of these retreats, is that, like I said at the very beginning, it opens this space where we make ourselves available to God and to one another, and be able to see that, one, we survive, and two, we actually grow and we actually connect, even with all the risks that come with it. And one of the things that I want to make a connection for people listening is the vision of SGI is to create what I call outposts for the heart. And outposts are places where people can come in from hostile territory, because we live in hostile territory, come in from there, drop our armor, drop our masks, and be known as we are, and learn and grow and connect and gain life so that we can go out and do it again. But so often we find it very difficult to find those kind of safe places. And they're few and far between. And the one comfort I get of seeing students be engaged and seeing them experience this kind of connection is it proves to them that it can be found. It can be experienced, even with all the fear and all the other things that go along with it. But it can be found. It does exist. Oftentimes we have lapsed into a condition that I would call we hope less. Not we're hopeless, but we hope less of whatever the event or the situation or the group is. And my hope is to ignite people who want to create these kind of outposts for the heart so that other people can join them and they can experience this kind of thing. You don't need to go to a silent retreat to experience it. And is it informed by God and His scripture and the release? Absolutely. All of it is. But it's not a Bible study. I can use the Bible to hide myself from somebody else. It's really easy. Because I just pull out of my knowledge box to interact rather than my being box to be known. And that's the choice we have every time. And my hope, even my dream and vision, is that outpost groups can crop up in a variety of places where people can find safety and be known and do life with other people so that they can go back out into the war and be able to fight it well, and know that there are people that they can go back to who will have their back, and they won't be the first ones to accuse them. They won't be the first ones to throw a Bible passage at them, because truth, well-timed, Proverbs tells us, is like fittings in an exquisite piece of jewelry. But truth, poorly timed, is like a weapon. It wounds and hurts. And the worst part about it is the person who's getting wounded and hurt feels guilty to say that because of what we have created in our Christian culture. And I see it all. I've gotten wounded by it. So that's a little bit of what the silent retreat is like. At the end of each weekend, we gather together and we reminisce and we look back and see God on the move and notice that in one another. And we experience communion together, which to me, it always feels like this reenactment of the Last Supper, literally where Jesus is there saying with his disciples, you have no idea how much I have longed to have this time with you. And we do that with one another, and it is a breathing embodiment of that to share it that way. So that's it. That's a reflection on this spring's silent retreat. I hope that it piques some curiosity. If it does, go to the website at drmitch.com and go to the drop down under CCU for silent retreats, and you'll see testimonies and you'll see pictures of people that have been a part of these retreats over the years. You can find out more there. If you want to know more, then sign up for being in touch with us and with me. And if you have questions, you can DM me on Instagram. You can send my questions my way in regards to it. The other thing I would ask specifically is if you would be kind enough that if you hear what is interesting to you and something that you think other people would be interested in, is to do two different things. One is to follow us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or whatever. Follow us. Great that you listen. I appreciate it very much. But I'm trying to get a fix on how many people count me in on this thing. I'm interested. And following accomplishes that. So follow me on your podcast provider, whatever that is, okay? Secondly, is if you like it, provide a review for us, because that expands our reach of people who might need this and who are longing for it, but have just lost heart. No, and that fits very much. They have lost heart that there is such a thing like this that I'm talking about. And that's all I am, is a catalyst for this kind of stuff. So DM me if you have questions. Subscribe and follow on the podcast. And if you like it, write a brief review to do that. If you're looking for other resources on the website, there is a digital devotional that you can sign up for called Setting New Boundaries. It's about healthy relationships. Every couple of days you get a devotional in your inbox that talks about healthy relationships and what you can do and what to pay attention to. And you can donate to the mission of SGI either monthly, $5 a month, or you can do it semi-annually or annually, whichever you prefer. And you will have something come to your inbox all year round. Now that may be daunting at best, but you can at least do a month and then see if you like it. If you don't, bow out. That's fine. But it's a resource there for your use and your encouragement as well. We can be found on any of 3 social media platforms. It includes Instagram. You can find us at the Psych Monologues, Facebook at ray.mitch, MITSCH, and then LinkedIn at drmitch as well. And so if you're listening, you can see it or find the podcast on Spotify or any of the major providers for podcasts. Or if you want to watch the actual video podcast, you can do that on YouTube and on my channel for Dr. Mitch or Ray Mitch, and you'll find it there as well. And because it always feeds it. Once I do this, I have a video podcast, but I also have just a regular audio podcast that goes out as well. If you're interested in partnering with us, or you know somebody whose heart beats for reaching this next generation of Christians that are really discouraged and Christ followers, they're really discouraged and have given up on the church, and they don't think they can find anything like that, if you want to partner with us, we'd be ever so grateful, and it would continue to grow the scholarship fund for these silent retreats so that if somebody can't afford it, we're able to help them afford it. And all of your gifts are tax deductible. Stained Glass International is a tax-exempt organization, so SGI is the place to go, and you can get a tax-deductible gift out of the whole thing. And you can support our silent retreats. You can support our overall mission. We've got a special project that I'm making people aware of to launch an actual website for SGI. Right now, it's residing in my website, and it's a $3,000 goal that we have to launch a full-blown digital community website that will reflect the values of SGI, and at least start with a digital outpost for the heart to see where it takes us. So if you'd rather, you can donate on the front page. You go down to the bottom. It says donate now. You can donate there to SGI, and whatever amount you send us, I'll send out a receipt for you, so you'll have a tax deductible gift notification to use in your taxes, which we're coming up on shortly. Or if you prefer to send us a physical check, you can do that as well. Just make your check out to Stained Glass International. Send it to SGI P.O. Box 160 East Lake, Colorado 80614. So SGI P.O. Box 160 East Lake, Colorado 80614. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. Until next time, I'll be here. Hopefully you will. Love ya. Later.